What's up, kidlets? This is Justin from DonkeyPunch Central. Just finishing up the MMA section of my solo videos for the 2011 DonkeyPunch Central Awards. We've talked about a lot of stuff in MMA. We've given out the award for MMA Idiots of the Year, my personal top 5 moments. Well, the 5 biggest moments anyways in MMA, my top knockouts and submissions on the year, my top 10 favorite fighters, as well as 3 fighters that are total douchebags. And we're going to finish up the MMA section right now. I'm going to talk about my top 3 fights on the year, top 3 individual fights on the year. And we're going to drop dime on my top 5 events of the year. So we're going to start with fights, because I only have 3 options for that. My number 3 fight on the year, Eddie Alvarez versus Michael Chandler, Bellator 58. This was, of course, for the Bellator Lightweight Championship. Eddie Alvarez, the champion. Michael Chandler won, I believe, a Season 4 tournament to earn the right to fight Eddie Alvarez. I consider Eddie Alvarez a top 5 lightweight in the world, if not top 3. But Michael Chandler came in, and Michael Chandler brought the fight to him. Alvarez is a bit of a traditional slow starter, so the first couple of rounds, Chandler really put it to him. Alvarez looked like he was coming back, but Chandler went out there and did what he had to do and finished the fight. He submitted Eddie Alvarez, I believe, in the 4th round to win the lightweight title in Bellator. Hopefully this is Eddie Alvarez's jumping off point to come to the UFC, although nobody ever comes to the UFC off of a loss, according to Dana White. But Eddie Alvarez, Michael Chandler, my number 3 fight on the year. Number 2, Frankie Edgar versus Gray Maynard 2. This happened at UFC 125. I was about to say 9, but 125. This was, of course, the infamous draw. And in this fight, Gray Maynard really brought it to Edgar in the first round, knocked him down 2 or 3 times, damn near finished the fight. Watching the fight back, I scored the fight for Gray Maynard. I thought Gray Maynard won the fight. But at the same time, I see where the draw came from, so I'm not like, oh my god, Gray Maynard got robbed. No, I can see where the draw came from. Frankie Edgar is a tough kid. Dude can take a beating, for damn sure. What this fight sort of had up on the eventual rematch that took place later in the year that Frankie Edgar would go on to win, this just had all that air of sort of uncertainty and unfinished business. Neither guy was happy with the draw. The fight just had so much more drama to it, so that's why it is my number 2 fight on the year. And my number 1 fight on the year, I don't think any surprise here, Mauricio Shogun Rua versus Dangerous Dan Henderson at UFC 139. Many pundits are calling this the fight of the year. Bloodstained Lane referred to it as the greatest MMA fight he had ever seen, and it's definitely got to be a contender for that. This fight had everything. I mean, Dan Henderson goes into a fight with one game plan and dares you to find a way to stop him from doing it. And everybody knows what the game plan is, and yet it still seems to be very effective. And then Shogun, of course. Shogun is a world beater, and Shogun is one of my personal favorite fighters, as you know if you watched one of my other videos. This fight had everything. Shogun was in trouble multiple times in the fight, held on. The fight ended up going to a decision, which Dan Henderson won, and I thought he won very clearly. But it's just a phenomenal fight. It was back and forth, had a little bit of everything, just absolutely phenomenal to go back and watch that fight, and that's like art. Like that fight is just phenomenal. So that is why it's my number 1 fight on the year. We're going to talk now about my top 5 events on the year, and this will completely wrap up the MMA section for me personally. I want to give a little love. Pepsi. I want to give a little bit of love to a couple of events that I really enjoyed, but just did not quite make the cut. Strikeforce Diaz versus Daly. Of course, we had Nick Diaz beating Paul Daly to retain the welterweight title. We had Gilbert Melendez beating Tetsuya Kawajiri to hold on to the lightweight title. We had Gegard Mousasi and Keith Jardine fighting to a controversial draw, and Aoki hitting that neck crank on Lyle Beerbohm. Just very exciting card. UFC 139, which was in San Jose. Obviously, the aforementioned Dan Henderson beating Mauricio Shogun Hua. We had Wanderlei Silva beating Kung Lei. We had Uriah Faber beating Brian Bowles. And actually, if you look at that card, the whole undercard is actually really solid too. There's a lot of solid undercard fights on that too. So that was just an entertaining card to watch. As well as UFC 135. That was, of course, John Bones Jones submitting Rampage Jackson in the 4th round. Josh Koscheck beating Matt Hughes, and Nate Diaz submitting Takanori Gomi. Another really entertaining card. But let's get into the actual top 5. My number 5 on the year, UFC 134, otherwise known as UFC Rio. Of course, Anderson Silva beating Yushin Okami to retain the middleweight title. Shogun beating Forrest Griffin. Big Nog knocking out Brendan Schaub. And 4 of the 5 main card fights ended up being finishes. So only one of the main card fights went to a decision. And that's something that's sort of rare in today's UFC, so that made the card a little extra special. But it's only my number 5 on the year. There's 4 better than that. That's insane, eh? My number 4 card on the year, UFC 136, which took place in Houston, Texas. That, of course, was headlined by Frankie Edgar beating Gray Maynard. Edgar versus Maynard 3. To, of course, retain the lightweight title. Jose Aldo beating Kenny Florian to retain the featherweight title. Chael Sonnen beat Brian Stan. Nam Phan beat Leonard Garcia in their rematch. And Joe Lozon submitted Melvin Guillard. 4 solid main card fights and a really great undercard fight. There was no complaints about that card whatsoever, from top to bottom. No complaints about it. My number 3 card on the year, and my favorite UFC card on the year, which means number 1 and number 2 aren't from UFC. Holy crap. UFC 129 in Toronto, of course headlined by George St. Pierre's unanimous decision victory over Jake Shields. Jose Aldo beating Mark Hominick, stopping Hominick from damn near coming back in that fight. Had that fight gone to a 6th round, I think Mark Hominick would have won the fight. Would have stopped Jose Aldo. But anyways, GSP beating Shields, Jose Aldo beating Mark Hominick, Lyoto Machida, of course, with that highlight reel knockout of Randy Couture, ending Couture's career. Canadian Rory McDonald beating Nate Diaz. And there were, I believe, 10, just checking my notes here, 10 Canadian fighters on the card, and 6 of them went on to win their fights. So that's, of course, a highlight, considering that's the first card, the first UFC card in Ontario. So it's, of course, noteworthy to mention the Canadian fighters. My number 2 card on the year is a card that hasn't happened yet. So that probably makes me a giant hypocrite. The Fight for Japan 2011 card, the card that's going to happen on New Year's Eve. Don't ask me to pronounce the Japanese because I can't, but it basically translates to, "Hello, how are you? New Year 2011." And well, first of all, I love the name, because the name of the event asks me how I'm doing. But just based on what this card is going to be, phenomenal. Aoki and Kitaoka for the Dream Lightweight title, Takeya and Inui, Kawajiri and Miyata, Mock Sakurai and Ryo Chonin, the semifinals and finals of the Bantamweight tournament. Just signed Fedor Emelianenko and Ishii. Possibly Tim Sylvia and Brett Rogers. Megumi Fujii might be fighting on the card. So just based on what this card could be, it's still good enough for me to give it number 2 on my list on the year. Number 1, aforementioned, had the 3rd best fight of the year, my 3rd best fight of the year, Bellator 58. Had Michael Chandler, of course, beating Eddie Alvarez for the Bellator lightweight title. Sorry. One of my personal favorite fighters, Hector Lombard, beating Trevor Prangley to retain the middleweight title. And also had Marlon Sandro with an impressive victory. Bellator 58, just from top to bottom, was the best card on paper they had all year, and the best actual card that they had all year. And my personal favorite MMA event of the year. thank you very much, everybody, for watching my 4 solo videos on the MMA portion of the 2011 Donkey Punch Central Awards. Going to be coming back with some more solo videos for video games, as well as solo videos for movies, and I can't wait for you to join me again. Peace!